Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I see it. There are a few people still trying to get in, but for time allowance, we want to make sure that we have the full hour. So, good morning. I'm Haley Wells, the Director of Communications and PR for the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce. And we will have a time for some questions at the end. So if you'll go ahead and submit those throughout this webinar in the chat feature on your screen, we'll get to those towards the end. And then please make sure you keep yourself muted and your video off if at all possible during the duration of this webinar. Let's go ahead and welcome our first guest, Chris Cook, Managing Director at Texas Tech in the Media and Communications Department. Hi, Chris. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Tech.
Okay, I am been at Texas Tech for 21 years, and I work in the Office of Communications and Marketing and as managing director. So most of what I do works with the media, also working through crises, as we're here talking about today. And I should say the first 11 years of my 21 have been were spent in athletics. I made the transition 10 years ago to the administrative side, but our office maintains the marketing, the branding of the university. We have people who manage that process, designers, photography, video, web team, all the different folks that we need to make things work. But mainly I deal with working with the press.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you, and especially all the knowledge you have from teaching a crisis course at Tech too. So thank you for being here. Now, help me welcome Kim Davis, who is the owner of Nomiss Communication. Kim, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am excited to be here. I am the owner of Nomiss Communication. My business handles media relations, crisis communication, freelance writing, and PR strategies. I am celebrating 15 years in the business, but have actually been in public relations for many more years. I actually started out as a print reporter with the Avalanche Journal out of Texas Tech, was there for about 4 years, and then was recruited into the public relations field, worked and was now the Office of Marketing and Communications to begin with, my first job in PR, and then was recruited into the hospital arena. Worked with what was Methodist Hospital before moving on to a long stint at University Medical Center as the PR director there, and then ultimately found my way into deciding to take a leap of faith and started my career with Nomiss Communication. And in my business, I work with a multitude of clients, from agriculture to education to healthcare and everything in between. I've learned more about building railroads to everything that you can think of. And I've always said that the greatest job is what I have, because I get paid to learn, and work a lot with the media and work a lot with internal and also with crisis communication, as we're talking about today.
Yes, we're so excited to have you here and your wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much for being here. Now let's welcome Nancy Sharp, Manager of Communications and Community Engagement with the United Family. Nancy, please introduce yourself.
You bet. Thanks, Haley. Appreciate you all doing this presentation. I'm a proud Raider, graduated from Texas Tech when it was the Department of Mass Communication, so been around a while. Had about a 10-year career in politics, working in the Texas Senate and the U.S. Senate for members, and then 14 years at Lubbock ISD as an executive director of communications and community relations there. And then a year ago, I decided to slow the pace down and came to work for United Supermarkets just in time to introduce myself to a pandemic. So I am bringing some skills on crisis communications learned in public education and politics to the United Family. So I'm part of the marketing team, and my area, we have both communications and the community engagement, which is the part of giving away money. And as you know, the United Family is very generous, and we give away millions of dollars to communities across our trade area. So that's a fun part too.
Yes, thank you so much. We're excited to not only have your knowledge with being at United and everything that you do there, but also your LSD background. So thank you for being here. We're excited to have everyone with us today. And unfortunately, all of you have either had to deal with a PR mishap in your career or have seen plenty along the way. So when we first sat down to discuss how we wanted to present, y'all decided Q&A would be the best because y'all have so much information and so many different points of view. So let's go ahead and jump into some questions. And I'm going to go ahead and throw the first question to Chris, and then y'all can jump in afterwards. So Chris, what is your general overview of crisis communication?
Basically, the way I define a crisis is anything that negatively affects your organization. Just anything that, and you can look at crises. I've polled students before and asked, what do you determine a crisis? Giving them an athletic stadium, for example, and they think of all these grand things that can happen, but crises are many different levels of things that can affect the reputation of your brand. So that's how I would define it, is the crisis itself. But the communication part is something that you sometimes don't know you need until you need it. If you had a plan sitting on a table, it collect dust. It would collect dust. Unless you had an organization that just wasn't acting right. But you don't know you need it until you need it. So I hope the point today, one of the things we get across is to walk away from this call and think about some of those things that can affect your business and start thinking about how you would plan and how you would respond. So when it does happen, you're minimizing the time from crisis to response, which is very important.
Kim or Nancy, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh,
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, yeah, you can have a plan that collects dust, but I agree with Chris. You do have to have in mind not if, but when a crisis happens. Clients that I've worked with and said, hey, do you have at least a skeleton idea of things that you can be thinking about? Because it's not if, it's when. Look at us now. So many people will say, no crisis is going to happen with me. I'm very small. I'm a small business. I have less than 50 people. I mean, and we don't ever get involved in something where there could be something bad that happens to me. We are all in a crisis right now that nobody could have possibly imagined. So it's not if, it's when. So even a very small skeleton plan of even just who would be your spokesperson if somebody came to you and needed to speak with the media on how are you handling what's going on right now? Just as simple as that, and be able to speak succinctly and that sort of thing. Those are important things, because how many people out there never thought you'd have a microphone put in front of you? How is your business handling this pandemic, etc.? Simple things, even a one-pager, are important to have. Look at where we are.
I would totally agree with both of Chris and Kim about exactly, it's a plan and it can be simple, and I think people sometimes think they overthink it, and it's just sometimes very simple, but it is so important because it is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I think another thing, I've joked with them, I did a little post-bac work at Texas Christian University, and our professor talked about the banana index, and it just really cracked me up, but I thought it was really relevant to crisis communications because it talks about the stages of a banana. So when it's green, it's emerging, it's not, nothing has happened yet, but you could probably see it. And if you stop it there, you don't get into the full ripe, blown, full-born crisis. Sometimes you can prevent a crisis by just being aware and watching for something and not waiting until it becomes a full-blown crisis. Sometimes things happen like a pandemic and it's immediate and it just starts there. But there are also some things that are emerging. And I think thinking through and kind of getting on a radar screen what could happen is important to crisis planning. And then the stinky black ripe banana that stays around is sometimes those rumors that are sometimes things that are even internally begun, and are things that people can't get over and can't get rid of, that you kind of have to deal with more subtly. But some good after planning and evaluation can sometimes help on those too. So I think I think it's exactly as my colleague said, so important that we are prepared, and it can be very simple.
Thank you. And I know you have all kind of touched in on this, but can you explain more of the importance of why it is utterly important that someone have some type of plan in place? Have you ever been a part of a company or dealt with a company that maybe didn't have anything, without naming names or anything like that, but just on why it was so important that something was in place and why they had to hurry and get something in place?
I'll take that one. I work with many small businesses. That's often who I'm hired to work with. But one of the things that I will often ask is, do you have a crisis plan? And if not, that's one of the first things that I'll get to work on, just a skeleton outline on, what is a crisis, how to anticipate a crisis, how to prepare for a crisis. And then basically it's just simple things that kind of can be a catch-all. Like I said earlier, having a person that will be able to speak to the media if needed. And the media is generally, because a lot of times they'll say, well, that'll be you, right? No, the media does not want to talk to a PR person. They want to talk to the CEO or the owner, that sort of thing. And a lot of times businesses are not aware of that. They think, wait a second, we've hired you. You're going to be the one that'll talk to the media. They don't want to talk to me. They want to talk to the person in charge. And so that's usually who I'll work with. And then helping them understand to speak in sound bites, because the entire interview, though it may take 20 minutes, only 5 seconds is going to show up on TV, generally a little bit longer in print, but not exactly what you want is necessarily going to be there. And a lot of that is just a little bit of media training and that sort of thing, which should be going on long before the crisis. That we'll get to later. But it's just a little bit of kind of easing the feeling. So when that crisis occurs, they're aware of how to follow that plan to a certain extent. And then understanding, to Nancy's point, kind of the banana analogy, I speak in a little bit of a different language, but it's kind of the sudden crisis, understanding a smoldering crisis, and the bizarre crisis. Kind of similar type of thing, things that either are sudden or smoldering that take months and months, or bizarre where you maybe have picketers that have nothing to do with prancing naked and protesting something unrelated to your business, but it causes the media to show up and you've got to make a comment as though it has nothing to do with your business. They're just different kinds of crises that you may have to speak to. So it's just little tips to know ahead of time so that when that time comes, you're prepared. It's kind of like preparing for a fire drill, even though fire may not or may happen at some point. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree with everything Kim said. And I think too, sometimes it's, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but just simple lists and who's in charge of what and who is going to be that spokesperson, and making sure you have cell phone lists and some of those very simple things. And if you're part of a larger organization, it is, most likely like at United Supermarkets, my communication plan is part of a larger crisis management plan. And so I know in advance who I'm going to go to find out the answers to some of the questions that, in whatever the emergency is, the crisis is, that somebody might ask, that the media is, and you can anticipate so many of those things. And it's just knowing who am I going to go to, because time is of the essence. And if you wait until you're in the middle of one, you're going to be cleaning up a mess instead of proactively shaping the message. And that's not the spin doctor. It's just trying to get the information out ahead of what people start creating their own stories in a void of information. People just start thinking what they think instead of shaping that narrative.
And I would agree with all of that, and add that when you put together a plan, it's I think Kim mentioned earlier, it could be a page. It doesn't have to be this exhaustive document. It's something that's for you, and it is. There are a lot of templates online. There are a lot of people you can work with to help plan that. There are ways to do it yourself, or again, you could seek assistance on that. But what's important is that you know that sheet, that one sheet, two sheets, three sheets is a toolkit for when this happens. It's not a guide. It's not you don't say, okay, there's the first thing I have to do. Here's the second thing I have to do. A crisis is going to dictate your response. You may have to jump right in the middle of what you thought was a chronological plan. You may bypass 1 and 2 because it's already that far along. So what is best is that you have those pieces that we'll talk about here soon outlined, and you're able to go to this document and know exactly what you need to do. If you do it enough, and hopefully you don't, you have it in the back of your mind. If you refresh yourself on your crisis plan, which you should do, you will have that in your head, but it's always good to have that document there to look at as if you were pulling tools out of the toolbox.
Yes, thank you. And I know all of you kind of touched on this, but media is super important, and how you deal with them during a crisis. So media doesn't necessarily have to be TV. It doesn't have to be the newspaper. It's social media. How do you handle media in general in a crisis, whether that's media training or not? Right now, people can just take what they want to social media and say whatever they want about your business. So how do you handle something like that?
And that's absolutely right. Everybody that's got a cell phone in their hand becomes a reporter. And so it's, I think, being cognizant of all the different channels that are available. But I do think that the first principle is to be honest and to manage people's expectations and say, you know, I don't know the answer to, you know, what happened yet, but I will be back with you at X time and will update you on what I know. I think being available and being honest is of utmost importance to keep credibility and build trust for your brand. And so I think that's super important that you do. And I think a lot of people, when we talk more about the traditional media, and certainly social media has changed how you handle a crisis immensely. But I do think that it's important that you are that you're honest about everything, and you don't have to tell everything you know, but certainly that you don't try to hide something, because you'll turn a one-day story of something negative that happened into a 3-day story about a cover-up. So people sometimes think the media is the enemy through traditional TV, newspaper, and I think that's really a mistake. I think media can be a great conduit to get out factual information, but you've got to build that trust, build those relationships, if you're in a large organization, well in advance, and then be accessible if you're in a smaller organization. So I think it is important.
I would add to that about the honesty part of that. Transparency and honesty equal credibility. And when you have the media, if you have an ongoing crisis, the media, you want them to come to you or to your spokesperson. If they're not getting what they need, or they feel like you're not being transparent, feel like you're not being honest, they realize you can't give them everything. They understand that. But if they feel like that you're dancing around something and you're not credible, they will go somewhere else. You'll be surprised at how your field of experts grows in a crisis, because they need that information. And so it could be somebody within your organization, not that you don't value everyone in your organization, but people that aren't equipped with the information to speak to the media, yet they get a call because someone looked online and just started looking for people who work there. So transparency and honesty equal credibility, and people will keep coming back to you. And also being available. You're going to be dealing with this, especially as a small business. Let's take it down to that, where you don't have a lot of resources in terms of personnel that may help you with this. Be available as much as you can, at least to answer the phone. It doesn't mean you're available with every single interview request. You may set up a schedule to say on an ongoing crisis, okay, I'm going to meet with you today at this time. If I have more information, we'll meet again tomorrow at noon. If I have more information before then, I'll let you know. And it's a way of letting the media know that they can trust you. And that is so important in this, because you do get rogue messages at times, and those can create, they just compound the issue. The other thing I will say about working with the media is, and I think this is to Nancy's point, the media aren't out to get you. That's in the movies. We see that a lot. Now, we do see it if you watch anything in politics, that's the perception we get. But we're not talking politics here. We're talking media that have a story to tell. They have a short time frame to tell it on the news. If you're talking about broadcast, to Kim's point, the sound bites, speaking in sound bites, but don't lose control. You remain calm. That lends to that credibility. If you're transparent, if you're honest, all of those things. So you've got to be in control of that interview, and how you're in control is you prepare before you go out and speak. And this is all things that are being your plan. You get the facts, you get the details, you put them in a nice little pattern. I've done this in my head driving to campus late at night because there might have been a chemical leak in one of the buildings, in one of the labs. And it's been a while since that happened, but you're on the phone getting details, and then you're going through your head, let's get these prioritized, because when I get out of the car, the media's there, we're going to talk to them, and we need to lay those out. So you may not have to speak to someone that quickly, but that's a process that you can go through, get the details, prepare them, prioritize them, and then deliver.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing. We're on like question 2. But I wanted to add, absolutely, responsiveness is everything. Even if you don't have an answer, it's good to just call the media back and say, I have not forgotten you, still working on it, we'll have an answer for you. And even if I'm big on mess up, fess up. If you have an organization and you have screwed up royally, fess up, but have a solution to how you're going to fix it later on. Honesty, 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 do the right thing and go, yep, we blew it, but this is how we're fixing it next time. Don't ignore the media thinking that they're going to go away. And I agree, the media will be your friend if you are honest and do the right thing from the beginning.
Yes, thank you. Media is definitely there to help you and be your friend, and I totally agree with that. They can help you get your story out there, and kind of help you change the narrative at the same time. So it's definitely good to be friends with the media and have them in your back pocket, know how to talk to them and work with them hand in hand. So thank you all for that. Now, I know some people may think that they're never going to have a crisis situation, but there's so many things that could turn into a crisis. We can all agree that we're in a crisis right now, that no one would plan for. But explain an instance that maybe you've seen something turn into a crisis that should have never been a crisis situation. Can you kind of talk about what a crisis is and maybe when something has become one that shouldn't have been to begin with?
I'll jump in on that one. An example, and it's not a huge example, but it's an example of a business, of a small, and I'll call it a small business, a restaurant in Colleyville. When the guidelines were, or when restaurants were allowed to reopen last week or the week before, a photographer for a newspaper there in Dallas took a shot of a patio of a restaurant, and he was at a distance. He did not accuse the restaurant of not practicing social distancing, but if you read into it, or if you read it, you might get the idea that, well, what's this person getting at? Because he shared it on Twitter. And it was just a picture of a restaurant saying, and the guy said that restaurants are opened up, practicing social distancing, this, and this. Well, some people jumped on the picture and said, well, it doesn't look like they're practicing social distancing. So you had a few comments. All of a sudden, the restaurant responded, and in the middle of their explanation said, this is the narrative the media wants to tell and wants you to, it attacked the media. Whether you believe that or not, that was the worst thing they could do, because then a handful of comments blew into almost 900 comments. People saying, I will never go to this restaurant again. It's a very sensitive topic right now. of people going back into restaurants, or some people opting not to. So that's just an example, though, and that can be applied to anything even outside of what we're dealing with right now. Is that don't make it bigger than it is. Don't think about. Don't get defensive. That's one of the worst things you can do, and don't get on social media and just start responding and digging your heels in and attacking people. That turns people off, even if you feel justified doing so. It made that situation worse for that business. They'll likely overcome it. I think they have loyal people. They'll overcome it. But it was a moment in time that I'm sure they would take back, because it created something on social media that probably was going to be, an 8 to 10 hour conversation, and then move on.
One example that just happened recently that I thought was interesting, and it kind of goes to that, just be transparent. The Dallas Morning News had contacted grocery stores and large stores that sell groceries all across the Metroplex, and we were one of them because we have stores in the Metroplex, about how many cases of COVID of team members or of employees. And so we answered the question, and another very large retailer refused to answer the question. And so then people go, oh, they didn't answer, so they must have a lot. And so the headline became of that story, which could have been just, this many cases in the Metroplex, and these are kind of how it spread across all these different retailers. The headline was not about how many cases, but that this one retailer had refused to answer. And we were way down the line with, Market Street has 9 stores in one case, and it was really a non-issue, but it was a big issue for that large retailer whose the headline was that they refused to answer the question. So that lack of transparency, that one-day story became a 2-day story that will probably be revisited.
I have a quick one to share. My son is at A&M, and no, that's not the crisis, sort of. But he is in an apartment complex that is a college apartment complex, and he and 3 other roommates have all been laid off during the COVID. And first of all, the information that they got from their landlord was right when the COVID started. The information to all of the college students living there was, due to the COVID, our offices are closed. That was it. And then, of course, a bunch of college students there who have all been laid off have been told, by the way, those of you who have not been able to pay as of April 1st, you are all going to be evicted by the end of April. Well, guess what? A bunch of college students have taken to social media, and that has been absolutely out of control for this apartment complex. Management team, because it's not like anybody is standing in line to take their place, and this organization is in some deep trouble, and we ourselves have now moved our son out, and we're working on taking care of that. But you talk about a bad situation when the Texas Apartment Association is a great place. You've now got parents getting involved with that whole mess, so that's a bad situation there. So that's something that we've witnessed as parents.
Those are great examples, and something that shouldn't be turned into a crisis in a way that people are kind of taking to social media, like we talked about earlier. So what are a few practical actions or tips that a business or organization should take in order to prepare for a crisis or a potential crisis? And Kim, if you want to answer that one.
I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier, is to know it's not if, it's when. And this coronavirus should be a wake-up call. It is when, and to be prepared. And we should not live in fear. I hope the takeaway from this is preparedness, not fear. And you know, in any crisis, you know, I talk to people that you can either be the victim, the villain, or the hero. And in any crisis, if you have some preparedness, you should come out being the hero. And if you are able to have that one pager, that two pager, and at least have some sense of being able to breathe wherever you do happen to land in the crisis, whether it's the sudden, the bizarre, or the analogy that Nancy used, if you have some preparedness and ability to just sit back and breathe, when that time comes, you will have a better chance of not going into a knee-jerk or panic reaction when that crisis arises.
Yeah, I agree. I think too, it's as simple as cell phone numbers for everybody in your organization you need to speak to, because a crisis never, I mean, if there's going to be a chemical leak, it's always going to be at night or on the weekends, it seems. So being able to readily access people's phone numbers, a list of what audiences you need to communicate with. So for United Supermarkets, it would be, you know, store directors, and I need to communicate internally to our exec team. I also need to communicate to our help desk. So who are getting calls, maybe the help desk is really for e-commerce, but when people are concerned, they're going to call whatever number they can find on the website. You know, so thinking about all the different audiences and what those messages might be, I think is really important. Just simple things, the emergency numbers for the police department and the fire department, everywhere you have a retail location. So if something happens, you have a way to quickly speak with someone who you can say, okay, we've got a chemical leak. Tell me what the fire department is going to be saying about this, so I make sure that I'm matching what I say with what you say. Simple things like that, I think, are really important to have. So it's not anything really complicated. It can be as simple as just lists and audiences. And then when I was at Lubbock ISD, I had created messages because we had a parent notification system where we could in an instant call, you know, all 30,000 parents. And by doing that, I had messages that I had pre-written for if there was a bomb threat, if there was a gun at school, if there was a gas leak near a school. And I had those canned and written, and all I had to do is fill in the blank of the school and the address, and I was ready to go, because being quick is the most important, and making sure parents know what's happening before they see it on TV. So that was the quick succession, and that parents would get a call, media would get a call, but that it was very quickly. So having those canned responses were super important. You just need to change some details. And anticipating, if you're a chemical company, you certainly need to have all those things prepared for a chemical spill. I mean, that's obvious that that's a potential risk.
The only thing I would add to that is, or build on, is the different scenarios that you can face. As Nancy mentioned, the having different messages set up, and I think in our system we have about 12 for some different things that could take place. But you know, walk away from the call today or sit down tonight and think about, what are the 4 or 5 things that could affect my business? And if you don't know those, Google businesses like yours that may have had issues in the past, see what they dealt with. And then think about how you might explain each. What would be a general message for that? Again, you're going to have to fill in the blanks when that happens. But I think one of the very important pieces here that Nancy also alluded to is how do you deliver that message? So you can deliver it through the media. That's when they become very important to you. If you have a database of customers, reach out to your customers directly. There's nothing like that personal message that can go to them. You're still going to have to talk to the media. It's going to be public, but communicate with your audiences in the different ways you can. And if you don't have a database, you need to use the media and social media.
Thank you. Yeah. And I agree with everything that y'all are saying. I know that there's some businesses out there that are small businesses and they don't think that they'll ever have to deal with a crisis. Do you have any advice for small businesses like that? And then also some tips that businesses should try to avoid to prevent a crisis from happening? Whoever wants to take that one.
Well, first let's say, obviously the whole thing about being honest, we've hit that a lot. I think you don't speculate or answer a hypothetical question. If somebody says a what if, answer the things that have happened or I think the other thing is if you don't know the answer, you take the questions from media, but then you say, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not going to speculate, but I can get back with you and I'll do that, in the next hour or whatever, as soon as I can, to provide some, make sure you're providing responses, but don't speculate. Never say no comment. I think we've all heard that a gazillion times, but that does not build trust. You've got to answer the question, and it can be limited and say, I don't know enough right now to say a lot, but here's what I know and I can say. And then I think also bringing in content experts is a good plan. Like I think Kim mentioned earlier, if there's I know in situations we've been dealing with COVID, we are not health departments, we are not scientists. So we have referred people to, this is what the CDC says. And so we are deferring to CDC guidelines, and you'll see that on our website or you'll see that in our comments. But also pulling in those content experts. I think that's something to do and not speculate. Well, I've heard that, COVID lives longer on plastic than your skin or whatever. Not a good idea. Just always refer to those content experts. Those are some things. You all have got some others, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think Nancy has made two very wise comments, and don't crystal ball, don't answer. Don't ever be afraid to say, I don't know, if you don't have an answer, but say, I can look that up and get back with you, because you're just going to look stupid if you try to answer a question that you don't have the answer to. And the other thing too, and Chris alluded to it, in a crisis, don't think the only people you need to talk to are the media. You have your customer base, you have your clients. Those people also need to be kept abreast of what is going on. If you are an apartment complex management team, like the bad situation I gave you, there are wonderful stories of apartment complex folks who have been phenomenal with explaining to their residents, hey, here's what's going on. Be sure to listen to your local officials and make sure this is the place you are going for the most up-to-date information. And don't just get your information from, WebMD or some, some place internet. You're going for your information, listen to your local officials. And they're not just talking to media, they are talking to their specific people. So understand that there are many audiences you're talking to when you're a business. And so understand that. The other thing too, I think is important, it was briefly touched on, but when you are going through a crisis and you've tabbed who is the spokesperson, also have a talk with your internal team on asking them to, when there is a crisis, not be the one to pick up the phone and call the media, because that can create misinformation. Make sure there's one person tabbed to be the one to contact the media proactively, because that can cause misinformation as well. And there are people that want to be the one, I'm going to call the media and let them know what's going on. And then, because there are a lot of times I've gotten calls from media saying, I got to follow up on X, Y, and Z, because this is what I've been told. And a lot of times it's not even a crisis, but some employee has deemed something a crisis and it's not. So make sure you're constantly talking to your people about what is a crisis, what isn't a crisis, so that the right person is actually deciding what is and what isn't, because that can cause turmoil as well.
And that is such a good point, in that how people perceive crises, and one person may look at two comments on social media and kind of freak out because it's not something they're used to, but it's two comments. Whereas one person may look at that as stressful and negative, whereas another person may say, well, let's just watch this and see what happens. It doesn't mean you don't prepare for that. people have different perceptions of what constitutes a crisis. But remember, in social media, and social media is such the easy example here because so much happens there and takes off there, is that remember that cycle in social media is so quick. There's always something new coming up. And sometimes it can take care of itself. It doesn't mean you blow it off, but it means you watch it and you monitor it. And if those two comments start growing, then you start thinking about reacting. But you can react too quickly. You can react too slowly. There is a sweet spot, but it's different for every situation.
Yes, thank you. And I know this has kind of been brought up, but the term spin doctor, I think Nancy brought that one up earlier. Can you elaborate a little bit? I mean, do people just hire PR firms because they think they can be a spin doctor for them? Or what is it that you want a PR person to do? And kind of explain the spin doctor terminology, please.
Well, I think your public relations, and Kim is the expert. I'll talk quickly and defer to her, but you know, I think your public relations person is the key contact that everybody knows, and that's both sides of the spectrum. Internally, as soon as COVID became an issue, I sent a message to all of our 94 stores in the United Family and said, print this message. It's my name and my cell number, and if anybody comes into the store wanting a comment about anything related to COVID, just give them my name and my cell number. So my cell number is all over the place, but it was also internally people knowing who to direct those questions to so that we had one place in and one place out on information. And then certainly externally making sure that people know. For small organizations, I think it's not that different. PR is not the spin doctor, it's the conduit of information who understands that there's a timeliness and the sweet spot, as Chris was talking about, and you can't respond tomorrow about a crisis today. Kim, this is your area. I'll defer to you.
I hate the term spin doctor. And I'll just tell you right now, yeah, if a client wants you to spin something, you will lose credibility with the media forever and ever and ever and ever. And my attitude is, do you want a client that you will never be able to promote in the future because you've lost all credibility with the media? Or do you always want the media to work with you and give up that one client? That's my attitude, because you have no credibility if you have nothing with the media. Spin doctor is a bad word. And if you are a PR person that spins, you're not going to maintain credibility with the media. It goes back to integrity, honesty, never lie, mess up, fess up. You do all those things, you are not a spin doctor. Whether you are a CEO or a PR person, the spokesperson, don't spin. Don't spin. It's a negative connotation.
The only good spin doctors were a band in the early 90s. So, but you know, I'll add to that too, is that you're not going to make a crisis go away. We hear that. How do I make this go away? When a crisis happens, it happens. It's there. It's in print. It's online. It's somewhere. It exists in people's minds. They've heard it. But you don't make it go away. But how you respond to that, how you respond, and people can call it hacks, spin doctors, whatever you want. There are people who have used PR people who prior to that referred to them as hacks, spin doctors, I guarantee you. And they're like, oh, you saved us. Thank you. So yeah, we take offense to that. But a poor response can be detrimental. And that's why all of this planning we're talking about is so important. Even just a few minutes of planning before opening your mouths or responding to an email or something on social media, just a few minutes of planning can save you so much. And again, you're not going to make it go away. You want to minimize, I like the term minimize the damage. And I don't know if I made that up or read it somewhere, but I've been saying it for years. But you minimize the damage that it's going to cause to your brand. And how do you do that? It goes back to all the things we've already said about transparency and honesty. And, but yeah, how you respond. So when you look at whether you hire the services of a PR person or a crisis manager, they're going to help you respond so you can minimize the damage to your brand. Great examples are BP in the oil spill and how they mishandled that. That cost them billions of dollars just on advertising alone to undo the damage that they did in their initial responses. And we're not talking about that kind of money here, but it can be relative to you. So again, a poor response can be detrimental. How you respond is how people are going to remember what happened. Crises are going to happen, as Kim said. It's not if, it's when.
I love that. And I just want to remind everyone, I've seen a few comments come through and responses in the little chat box. If you have anything for one or all of our panelists, please type that. And I have a few more questions to ask while y'all are doing so. So the next question I have is, you've all been in the business for a while, as y'all had said at the beginning when you introduced yourselves. And I'm sure you've seen numerous companies handle a crisis situation really well and not so well. Could you share an example or two of those that you've seen either been a part of or watched play out on the sidelines? I know y'all have already given a few examples, but there are a few more over the years that y'all could share. And whoever wants to go first.
You're asking some examples of some things that have gone well?
Either or, either or.
I gotta brag on some people that I work with, and truly this has been because they have done it. So I'm not even bragging on myself. But I have a group that I've been with actually since I started 15 years ago. They were actually my first client. But I will tell you, Calvert Home Healthcare, CPCS, Personal Care Services here in Lubbock have done a phenomenal job in communicating with the people that they serve. I mean, they deal with crisis situations all the time with just in the business that they're in. But in this pandemic, they have been phenomenal. They have a crisis plan. They've been dealing with their own people very well. They've been contributing to the community in ways that they can. And then their sister groups in Amarillo, BSA Compassion and Compassionate Home, have done equally well. And they have those companies in Amarillo. And I have just been blown away. And they have taken the ball and run with it and just said, hey, Kim, this is what we're doing. Can you help get some information out to the media? And they're the good stories that they're telling. We are partnering with Carillon to do something here, or we're partnering with, High Plains Food Bank in Amarillo. Can you just get a story out there for us? They've just called and said, can you just get information out? They've just found good stories to tell about themselves, and I'm just blown away with what they've done. I can't take credit except telling good stories on their behalf. They've done it on their own. There's what I can share.
That's awesome. Thank you. Chris or Nancy, do you have something that you would like to add to that?
I think there are a lot of examples of the way that companies have handled these well, and obviously a lot of bad examples. You can look those up, but you see it all the time. You see apologies on social media from businesses, small businesses to large, about something that may have happened, and they use that platform along with the media to express, to acknowledge what happened, to take responsibility. Those are if your company is responsible, and I think it may have been, it was obviously Nancy or Kim that mentioned this earlier. If you're responsible, own it, tell how you're going to correct it, and move on. And we see that quite a bit. Bluebell was a great example of, they had that outbreak of, I guess, with listeria at ice cream, and immediately took things off the shelves. They were proactive in saying, hey, we've got a problem. They didn't, and I think every shelf in America that had Bluebell, and I want to say because of their, the popularity of the brand ahead of time, people were more sympathetic to them than they were upset that one of their factories had this potential outbreak. But getting ahead of something as best you can. You are never, it is rare, it goes back to the banana analogy. A lot of them happen a lot of crises happen at that stage when the banana is ripe. There's the crisis. Here it is. and you're always seem to be playing from behind. And how do you get in front of it? So again, a lot of the things we've already mentioned can at least catch you up and help calm that conversation to where you're maybe in a position to maybe get a step ahead or at least be neck and neck with it until you're able to help diffuse it somewhat.
Yeah, I agree. I think I already gave my COVID analogy, but one thing I think that I think we can't hit on enough is that what Kim and Chris have both said about what are you going to do about it, and the age-old example of Tylenol when they had product tampering. They owned it. They took product off the shelves, and then when they came back in, it was with tamper-resistant packaging, and they talked about all the things they were going to do. And that was, new, and unfortunately it was them. It could have been anybody, but I thought it was so important that they talked about here's what we're going to do about it. And we didn't see this coming, but we're going to own it, and we're going to move forward in a way that prevents it from happening from anybody else in the future. So I think that's wise.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great examples. And I know right now people are trying to save money because they're, with COVID happening, there's a lot of money saving and businesses not spending as much, but people do need to have a plan in place. Do y'all have any tips or free tools that people could utilize to get started on a crisis plan so they at least have something prepared before they actually maybe need to call a PR firm or something like that to spend money on in the future?
Yeah, I just, this morning, because I was curious, we talked about that, I Googled, and there's a bazillion things you can just Google crisis communications and get some ideas and some templates. But I think a lot of it is just thinking through, what am I going to need? What are the resources I'm going to need? As Chris said earlier, what things could happen in my industry? And then who am I going to communicate with? For myself, when I came to United and really during the midst of COVID, I had thought about our guests and our team members and the help desk and social media and all those different channels. And it was about 2 days into it before I thought about, we were changing our what people could do. We were requiring our team members to wear masks and to do this, that, and the other. Well, we have a lot of vendors that come into the store, and I had not made sure that they had the information that they're going to be required to wear a mask, and they're going to be required to do a temp check and all those things that we require of our own team members. And so I was about a day late getting that out because it just wasn't on my radar screen. So I think good preparation and thinking outside the box, not the usual channels, but who else do I interact with, or does our business interact with? Thinking about those vendors that come and or the FedEx guy or whomever. What are the rules going to be? So
I love what Nancy has to say, and I tell you, to prepare, I think everybody that has participated today to listen to Nancy and Chris and to me, I hope that maybe you've taken some notes, and that's a great start. I think another thing that you can do is be news watchers, readers, pay attention to what's going on, and do a little bit of an autopsy on what you're seeing on the news and how you're watching other people going through crisis and how they're handling it. And was that a good news story or a bad news story? Do a little bit of autopsies on how you see other people handling things. Do a little bit of an autopsy on how this pandemic has panned out. How did it affect you? How did it not? Were you involved? How did you handle your clients? How have you seen other people handle their clients similar to your business? And look back and those are all things, especially as our whole world is involved in this, and look at those things, take notes, and this is the perfect time to have a little preparedness on things for the future. That's what I recommend.
And anytime we see something happening on another campus, we're looking at at stories, and kind of at the point where I don't read the story just to read about what happened. I'm looking at quotes and thinking about the question that was asked, or if it's a statement that was released, what went into that statement. And is it something that we would do? Is it something that's a great idea, let's apply it here? You know what, I wouldn't say that. Maybe that's not a good idea to say that. So we're always evaluating each other and doing that environmental scan of different crises that happen, whether they relate to higher education or not. Obviously, higher education is we focus more on, but we'll look at different crises and things that happen in different industries that could affect us as well.
Thank you all so much. I know we're almost out of time, but I wanted to kind of leave everyone with, what is one thing you've learned when handling a crisis over the years that you wish you knew when you first started your career?
I'll jump in there. I thought, and I'll be quick, but my first month, I think, at Lubbock ISD, we had an incident. There was a bad incident at a campus, and I, talked to a police officer, and then I went and told the media, this is what happened. And then later talked to the principal, who was actually there and knew exactly what happened, and the information was different. So I learned from that very hard experience, you've got to go to a primary source, and you've got to know. And the policeman was not trying to mislead me, but everybody has a lens, and he had made an assumption about one very critical fact. So it goes back to that credibility. So I picked up the phone and called the news directors at the 3 stations and said, hey, I told you something that was incorrect. I believe it to be correct at the time, but I've since learned it wasn't, so I need to correct that. And so I think I've gained some trust, because probably nobody would have ever known, but I knew that what I'd said was incorrect, and it made the story a little better than it should have been. And so I think I gained some trust with some folks with that. But boy, you've got to always go to a primary source to get information and make sure you know exactly what happened.
I think that I've learned that you never stop learning. You never stop learning. I've, crisis communication is a little bit OJT. Crisis is different. But I know that in my 20s, I thought I was big and bad and had all the answers for everything, and I got this. And maybe it's just wisdom with everything, but you never stop learning. And the biggest thing is, you can't wait for the crisis to happen to have relationships. You got to have relationships before the crisis. And that's my greatest message to everyone.
And I'll agree with both of those. And the relationships was what I was going to add as well, is that in a crisis, there could be nothing more valuable to you than being able to pick up the phone and talk to somebody and maybe give them some background. You never go off the record, but you can have conversations and work with people to build that relationship and build that trust before, as we said, transparency and honesty equal credibility. You can build that credibility well before you need to employ it in a crisis.
That's great. Please help me thank all of these speakers for, spending time with us today. I'm going to go ahead and put their contact information back up on the screen. That way, if you would like to send them an email later on, you are welcome to do so. But thank you all for being here. And if you have any last comments, please feel free to do that. But I know several businesses have been opening up their doors again or are preparing to do so. So I want to remind you all that we do have a resource page with loan information, PPPE resources for opening up soon, as well as information on becoming a Lubbock safe business through the city of Lubbock. So you can actually visit InThisTogether, lbk.com, as well as the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce.com COVID page for the most up-to-date information. And on behalf of the Lubbock Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors and our staff, thank you all for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.